The Big Ten has announced a suspension of Michigan head football coach Jim Harbaugh. He will not be allowed to be on the sidelines for the final 3 games of the regular season. This due to a violation of the conference's sportsmanship policy. This obviously all in relation to the in-person scouting scheme in which Michigan allegedly worked to steal signs of opponents over a course of several years. We welcome you in to Big Ten Today, presented by Gatorade. Dave Revson and Jerry DiNardo with you. We've just gotten this news, as everyone has, within the last half hour. We're going to go through all of the statements, everything associated with it. We're going to talk to Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports, get his reaction. But Jerry, just first blush, your thoughts on what we saw here from the Big Ten. It is a long and legally argued document. What did you take from it?
Proof that these accusations have happened. Perhaps not proof that Jim Harbaugh knew, but proof that Jim Harbaugh is responsible for everyone that is under his umbrella in his organization. This impacted the balance of competition, one of the most significant things you could do in college athletics, and so it's pretty clear Jim's responsible for it, whether he knew about it or not.
Right. I think that's the kind of big picture message, if you were going to get one thing out of this, that this was about integrity of competition.
Correct.
And the Big Ten feels irrefutably that the integrity of the competition was impacted here, and they feel that gives them the authority to act.
The conference owes it to the student athletes that play every sport in this conference that it's fair competition. That's why they have the right to do this without pointing fingers who knew what. That's not important. It's got to be fair for the student athletes.
Let's dive into the specificity here of these statements. This was the announcement from the Big Ten, the conference announcing the University of Michigan has been found in violation of the Big Ten sportsmanship policy for conducting an impermissible in-person scouting operation over multiple years, resulting in an unfair competitive advantage that compromised the integrity of competition. The Big Ten Conference Agreement 10.01 states in part that, quote, the Big Ten Conference expects all contests involving a member institution to be conducted without compromise to any fundamental element of sportsmanship. Such fundamental elements include the integrity of competition, civility toward all, and respect, particularly toward opponents and officials. As a penalty imposed on the institution, the university football team must compete without its head football coach for the games remaining in the 2023 regular season, effective immediately. This disciplinary action shall not preclude the university or its football team from having its head football coach attend practices or other football team activities other than the game activities to which it applies. For clarity, the head football coach shall not be present at the game venue on the dates of the games to which this disciplinary action applies. Again, the timeline on this, the NCAA initially informed the Big Ten and Michigan that they had opened an investigation into allegations of in-person scouting back on October the 18th. It was 2 days later that Connor Stalions, the Michigan assistant, was suspended without pay. And then the report started to circulate October 24th that Stalions purchased tickets to road games at nearly every Big Ten opponent, as well as 4 potential CFP contenders. A few days later, a former Division III player and coach was reportedly compensated with cash and Michigan football tickets for recording the Wolverines' upcoming opponents. That story came out. Then on Monday, the Big Ten notified Michigan the program could face discipline, again citing the sportsmanship policy that they ultimately used to rule today, as well as the NCAA's bylaw on the responsibility of a head coach for anything that goes on within his program. On Wednesday, Michigan responded to the Big Ten notification, a 10-page document. We learned in the Big Ten's document today they were given a 1-day extension for that response. The document contains the line, well, I missed the line, unfortunately. And then Friday, the Big Ten suspended Jim Harbaugh from the sidelines for 3 games remaining in the regular season. So here is the statement here on the Big Ten from Jim Harbaugh. We impose this disciplinary action even though the conference has not yet received any information indicating that the head football coach was aware of the impermissible nature of this sign-stealing scheme. Then it goes on to say this is not a sanction of Coach Harbaugh, It's a sanction against the university that, under the extraordinary circumstances presented by this offensive conduct, best fits the violation. And then the logic for that is it preserves the ability of the student athletes to continue competing, but then recognizes that the head coach embodies the university for purposes of the football program. The conference recognizes that additional disciplinary actions may be necessary or appropriate if it receives additional information concerning the scope and knowledge of or participation in the impermissible scheme. So, Jerry, that's kind of the overarching logic. And again, kind of if you were to summarize it here, it's this, that a violation occurred. If you go on and read this document, and again, it's about 12 pages long, we've had a chance to dive into it. They basically say the NCAA gave them irrefutable evidence that this happened. The NCAA said they absolutely believe it. They go on to say that Michigan has really not done anything to counter whether or not it happened. They lay out the authority of the Big Ten to do this. That is a huge part of this document. I'd say several pages lay out the authority under the sportsmanship policy to make this decision. But then there is this logic of, even though Jim Harbaugh didn't know, and they make it very clear in this document, they have zero evidence to show that Jim Harbaugh knew this happened, that because he is the embodiment of the program, they feel like this is the best solution. What do you make of that logic?
I don't remember any time that I've been involved in college athletics, and I was a freshman in 1971, either player, coach, or media, where the head coach isn't held responsible for everyone under his or her purview, right? So you don't have to prove that Jim Harbaugh knew it or didn't know it to protect the student athletes. I keep going back to the student athletes. Fair competition. So whether Jim knew or didn't know, when I know I'm playing defense and when I know it's a pass play, that's unfair competition. When I know it's a run play, that's unfair competition. So the severity of the punishment, without knowing all the details and going through all these documents, I don't really have a strong feeling about whether it's too much or too little, whatever. There's not enough evidence that I've seen.
So part of the logic here, I'd say an overwhelming part of the logic, is the notion, obviously this falls under the purview of the sportsmanship policy, and it talks a lot about the integrity of the game. And so I guess I would ask you, from the position of someone who has been in the shoes of a head coach, do you believe the integrity of the game is compromised to the extent that it's laid out here based on one team having knowledge of an opponent's signals?
Okay, if I have this right, I steal a signal which tells me maybe a formation, maybe a run, maybe a pass, or maybe even more specifically than that. But just on the base level, if I'm a defensive coordinator and I've broken their signals, not through watching them signal during the game, but by having what's been previously told to me, if I'm a defensive coordinator, I know it's a run or pass, that is absolutely an advantage to my defense, an unfair advantage. And I could give you examples on the other side of the ball as well. If I'm calling plays and I know it's zone coverage, I'm going to call it a zone beater. If I know it's man coverage, I'm going to call a man beater. So I don't know how anyone can say that this isn't a big deal. I can't even wrap my arms around someone that says this isn't a big deal. This is as big a deal as I've ever heard of when it comes to unfair competition.
And it does make a difference in your mind, the notion, because look, one of Michigan's countervailing arguments here was this notion that, hey, teams are aware of other teams' signals all the time, that there's information exchange. They certainly cited an example which I think has risen to prominence here in the last couple of days. Do you distinguish between what Michigan is, what the NCAA says it has irrefutable proof that Michigan did, versus this notion of coaches exchanging information based on, hey, we played these guys and here's what we learned?
Coaches always exchange information unless it would obviously hurt their own program. So if I've played opponent A, and now next week opponent B is playing them, and they want information. Who's their best offensive tackle? What do you think of their quarterback? What do you think of their defensive backs? That's standard in the profession. Now, if I have signals, if I would share information like I think their quarterback's really good on the move, make sure you contain him, that's helping one opponent beat another. If I'm going to help that friend of mine beat someone else and I have this signal information, yes, I would share that with them. And that has gone on forever. The thing that has changed because of the spread and the signaling is that when you break the signals prior to the game that you've played, that's a problem, and that's what this is all about.
Right. No, so I think you just keep coming back to the notion of these games is that it's supposed to be played on a level playing field. And I can just tell you from studying the history of the sport, right? The Big Ten is the first conference that was formed. It was formed in 1896. And the idea was codifying eligibility. How do we decide who should be able to play in these games and who shouldn't be?
Right.
So from the very beginning, the notion has always been it's got to be a level playing field. And I think what really strikes you, like no doubt the overarching argument in all of this was based on the NCAA's rules, this was not a level playing field. And again, kind of the commissioner making the argument that he absolutely has the authority, even though the NCAA's investigation isn't done, that based on the irrefutable evidence that he believes has been presented by the NCAA, that he has this authority under the sportsmanship policy because the entire basis of this sportsmanship policy is a level playing field.
Yeah, and from an X and O standpoint, a coaching standpoint, this is another example how the sport of football has evolved. When I got into coaching, you were allowed to live scout. You really got very little out of it. When this became important to scout is when we stopped huddling and the offensive player caller was actually signaling. Now, if you would live scout, that's an advantage. Plus your phone, right? I mean, we're talking about a time when somebody pushed an offensive guy into the huddle to go tell the quarterback what to run, and we weren't a spread type of team. There was no value in it. Now there's value with it, and unfortunately, sometimes as soon as evolution of the game starts, someone tries to get an edge, and I think this is an example of someone trying to get an edge.
Right. I mean, this is all about the boards that are.
Yes.
Right? I mean, that's what this is about.
Right.
Mickey Mouse and, whatever it is, a slice of cheese.
Right. And for those people that say, well, let's just get headsets, okay, that's down the road.
Right.
That doesn't make this okay.
No. I mean, I think we probably should do that. I think there's a compelling argument to be made. But what this is, hey, based on the rules that we have, that everyone who participates in the NCAA agrees to, this is illegal. And then based on the rules that the authority that has been given to the commissioner, again, agreed on by everyone who is a member of the Big Ten, and they go to lengths in this statement today to say everyone agreed to this, the commissioner has the authority to do this. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone is happy with it, and certainly Michigan is not. We're going to give you their response to this as we continue. Again, the headline here, Jim Harbaugh suspended for 3 games, will not be able to be on the sidelines for the next 3 games for Michigan as a result of the improper scout. Back on Big Ten today, again, the headline, the suspension of Jim Harbaugh. He will sit for the final 3 games of the regular season. He is allowed to continue coaching the team during the week. This was part of the statement from the Big Ten today. It said the integrity of competition is the backbone of any sports conference or league. That is especially true for sports contests between student athletes. Athletes compete to win. Competition that is only about winning while disregarding the rules of fair play diminishes all of us, including our institutions. The integrity of the competition must be preeminent. Its value is fundamental and far exceeds the value of winning. Indeed, it is the very source of any value in winning. Enforcing the sportsmanship policy with appropriate discipline this season in light of the university's established violations this season is thus of the utmost importance to protect the reputation of the conference and its member institutions and to ensure that our competitions on the field are honorable and fair. So again, that part of the logic as to why this happens now rather than after the NCAA rules. This is what Michigan had to say. This is their response. They said, like all members of the Big Ten Conference, we're entitled to a fair, deliberate, and thoughtful process to determine the full set of facts before judgment is rendered. Today's action by Commissioner Tony Petitti disregards the conference's own handbook, violates basic tenets of due process, and sets an untenable precedent of assessing penalties before an investigation has been completed. They go on to say, we are dismayed at the commissioner's rush to judgment when there is an ongoing NCAA investigation, one in which we are fully cooperating. It concludes Commissioner Petitti's hasty action today suggests that this is more about reacting to pressure from other conference members than a desire to apply the rules fairly and impartially. And then finally, it says, by taking this action at this hour, the commissioner is personally inserting himself onto the sidelines and altering the level playing field that he is claiming to preserve. And doing so on Veterans Day, a court holiday, to try to thwart the university from seeking immediate judicial relief is hardly a profile in impartiality. To ensure fairness in the process, we intend to seek a court order together with Coach Harbaugh preventing this disciplinary action from taking effect. Bruce Feldman from Fox Sports is in State College getting set to cover Michigan and Penn State. I would say this throws a bit of a wrinkle into it, Bruce. It certainly is no surprise. I mean, I think we've been expecting something all day. Frankly, we've been expecting something for a couple of days. But what's just kind of your first blush reaction to the punishment and to the logic behind it?
Dave, I think that the timing of this is the baffling part, that literally Michigan, I think, was wheels up at 3 p.m. and their players and the team is traveling when this comes down. The timing, honestly, I don't think could have been worse from an optics standpoint for the Big Ten. I mean, this has been such a messy story on so many levels. Michigan's obviously looked really bad in it from all the Connor Stallion stuff and all the video, that people can pull from it and everything else during games. And then for this, I wondered how this was going to play out, because Tony Petitti, to me, was in a no-win situation. I mean, the one scenario I could envision earlier in the week was that there would be some kind of suspension, maybe an indefinite suspension of Harbaugh, because you don't want to punish the players. And then ultimately, there would be some kind of injunction that I think Michigan's legal side feels like that it will be able to get Jim Harbaugh back on the field. And then if you're Tony Petitti and have had all this uproar from Big Ten coaches, which we've documented a lot at The Athletic especially, then I think you'd say, look, I did the best I could, and here's where it is. You have to let due process play out. The part that was puzzling to me a little bit here was not to see, in the Big Ten release, was that Tony Petitti said they couldn't prove that Jim Harbaugh had knowledge of this situation with Connor Stallions, but also beyond that, it was like that this is not a sanction of Jim Harbaugh. Well, clearly it is. So going forward, and I heard what the conversation you had with Coach DiNardo, and I agree with a lot of it from all the conversations I've had with coaches about how what apparently Stallions was doing and having somebody to attend games and do the in-person scouting on campuses or on during rival opponents' games crosses a line into the normal signal stealing that we expect. But again, right now the timing of this is so awkward. It feels like a Friday news dump. And again, I mean, is this a case where Michigan ends up getting some kind of injunction at the last minute, and then Jim Harbaugh is back on the sideline anyway? I mean, this is just such a bizarre story as it's playing out.
It's going to be fascinating, Bruce, to see how this plays out here in the time up until the game. Jerry, I think you had a question you wanted to ask?
No, not a question. Just I had some comments after Bruce was done.
Oh, okay. All right. So we'll let you go here, Bruce. Really appreciate it. I know this story's going to be developing. You got a lot of work to do here, but obviously appreciate your insights.
Always a pleasure to talk to you guys soon.
All right. Thanks, Bruce. We take a look at Michigan's schedule and the 3 games that this is in effect for. Again, at least now, there is this notion of the temporary injunction, but the game tomorrow against Penn State is the headliner, then going to Maryland next week. And then, as you may be aware, they finish off with a fairly significant game Thanksgiving weekend against Ohio State. Here is a look at the Michigan players getting on the airplane today. And again, this is a little while ago, and you can see a general theme developing, this notion of Michigan against the world. Michigan against everybody is the sweatshirt there. Jerry, you had a point you wanted to make, and then I want to get into this idea of kind of how this is going to spin forward into the game.
Yeah, I want to make a couple comments, okay? When you talk about unfair competition, we're talking about the student athletes. So let's think about some of the things that have been said so far. Full set of facts. If I played against Michigan and I was playing offense and they knew what I was doing, that's unfair competition. You have enough facts to know that the competitors were being told if I was going to run or I was going to pass. Timing of this, there's no good timing. This isn't a bad timing. This is addressing the fact that it hasn't been fair for student athletes. And the last thing is, Commissioner Petitti, he wasn't in a no-win position. He did the right thing. This is a winning position because he defended all the student athletes in the conference, not just the football players. So forget about timing. He did the right thing.
He makes a point in here, and I think, look, and a lot of this is just going to be about where your allegiances are, and I understand that, particularly from the point of view of Michigan fans. But part of the argument that has been made is that you would be singling out a school if you make an action like this. And he makes exactly the opposite argument in this document, and he says, I'm going to kind of paraphrase it here, but that he feels that failing to act would show favoritism toward Michigan. So the notion was, hey, if you act here, then you're acting against one school in particular. You're picking on a school, for lack of a better way of putting it. And he's essentially saying, no, we're just saying no one is above the rules, and that he clearly delineates out that he has the authority to do this, and then he does it. I agree with Bruce to a certain extent. Like, the timing is unfortunate. I mean, if you're on your way to a game, you're in the airplane, and you find out you're not going to be able to coach in the game.
But you put yourself in the position.
And again, let me finish the statement.
I apologize.
Right, but part of what the Big Ten said here is we gave you an extra day to file. You asked for an extension, and then you had a lengthy defense of yourself. And so then, from the Big Ten's point of view, it takes time. Like, 12-page documents don't just produce themselves. And so I think, is the timing unfortunate? Maybe, but it was as expeditious as it could be given the circumstances. So it's a fascinating spot. I do want to pick up on what we just saw, the players in the T-shirts, and kind of, not that specifically, but kind of what that symbolizes of the mindset of these players going into Beaver Stadium for a huge game, one of the two biggest games of their season here tomorrow. This us against the world mentality. And by the way, they're not the only ones that adopt the us against the world mentality, right? We've seen that from Ohio State already earlier this year. How do you think this plays into the game?
Jim Harbaugh has a strong connection, I believe, with most, if not every player in that team, especially Blake and especially JJ. He is connected to this team. This team will play as hard as it's played all year. They will make this. We have to win it for Coach Harbaugh, and it will be an emotional lift for this team going against Penn State. So I think in the short term, this helps Michigan compete with Penn State. The downside is the game management. My guess is Sharon Moore, offensive coordinator, will be in charge of game management. And, you know, when Jim was suspended for the first 3 games, they kind of rotated that head coach in non-conference games. I suggest to you there's going to be decisions tomorrow in the Penn State-Michigan game that could make or break someone's career. And so this staff has got to really bond and make sure that they can game management. Someone has to lead the charge, but the assistant coaches, they've never been under this kind of pressure.
Right. I think, I don't want to say they made a joke of it, those first few games, but the notion of one guy was going to coach for one half and one guy was going to coach for another, there was, I think there was an understanding that barring some sort of crazy circumstance, they were going to win all of those games. And so, hey, it was an opportunity for each one of these coaches to have a chance to be the guy making the decisions. This is a far different scenario. This is a huge, huge game. Now, again, it leaves open the possibility, and Michigan said, hey, we're going to do everything we can to get a temporary restraining order here. The litmus test on that, by the way, is irreparable harm. So you have to get a judge to agree that it will cause irreparable harm for Jim Harbaugh not to be there. Now, again, that's a term that's open to interpretation. That's what we're looking at, though. It is absolutely fascinating. Biggest key to this game outside of Jim Harbaugh tomorrow is what?
Quarterback play. Michigan has a veteran quarterback. Penn State has a young quarterback.
Yeah, and we saw Drew Aller play really well last time. He's been better at home than he's been on the road, although he had a really nice game on the road last week against Maryland. It is going to be fascinating. It is going to be a zoo. Absolute zoo at Beaver Stadium. Again, we'll continue to keep you updated on the Big Ten Network, but that does it for now. Thanks so much for watching Big Ten Today.